Hello everyone. You ever just record an entire video and then realize you forgot to press record on your computer? Yeah, me neither. So anyway, today I wanted to talk about blind dets. Blind dets are a pretty interesting aspect of demo because, inherently they're going to be unreliable. And most of the time you don't want to be wasting your valuable time and your valuable ammo setting a trap that is very unreliable, right? So I kind of want to talk about how to make blind dets more successful and basically how to make them no longer blind dets, right? Because the best way to make, blind det traps more successful is to make them not blind det. So yeah, let's start off with first things first, which is kind of sliver vision, I'll call it. So basically everything I'm going to talk about for making traps more successful that you can't actually see is using extra context in order to make them more probable. And the first thing I'm talking about is still vision, but kind of contextual vision. Because you won't always be able to set a trap that you can just see and see the players on. And in some cases, you might actually be forced out of a point before anyone actually walks on it, and you might have to rely on, slivers of vision or temporary vision in order to kind of time a det for when you expect a player to be on the trap, right? One big example is actually here on Snakewater. I'm a big fan of trapping up the pack on Snakewater 2nd, just because it's a pack that gets taken essentially every single time a team pushes a point, whether a demo or a soldier or even a scout needs ammo, or very often a soldier is going to want that pack as well. So basically every time a team pushes into Snakewater 2, someone is taking that pack. And very rarely do people actually clear it as well. But actually getting the det is another story, because on one hand, a player might just walk into it. Sometimes demos just kind of walk up towards the pack and die. Sometimes a soldier will bomb in and land on the pack and die. And that's all, great. But more often than not, you as the demo playing bats get forced out of the point before you can actually see success with that trap. And in times like that, relying on the, the slivers of vision you have through bridge, as you're retreating towards right lobby, might give you some indication for when a player is trying to walk towards it. And being able to rely on that sliver of vision to see and kind of feel out, the enemy intentions, is useful information for making a trap like that way more successful. Yeah, there was another example I had in the initial recording that I kind of forget about. But temporary vision can't... Oh, yes, still on Snakewater, actually. Trapping lower lobby. So, oftentimes, the doorway itself in lower lobby will be trapped. But it's less common for the pillar on the walk up to right lobby to be trapped. And again, that's not a trap you can actually spot. But from where you're playing disad in left side by spawn, you can spot a sliver of lower lobby, and you can see a player crossing, and with that context, you can potentially time your det to make it more successful. So in both of these cases, these are traps that in many situations you will not have vision on, and it would be completely random whether you are able to get a kill with it or not, and you're still able to use slivers of vision to get context that will help inform you to det and get that pick, right? So that's the first way, is using kind of accessory vision to, inform player intentions, player movement, to help you time that det, right, without watching the trap directly. And that can be quite nice. Another big example, and this is kind of self-explanatory, I guess, is just comms. A lot of the time, a trap might be out of position where you don't really want to play to spot it because you are, such a valuable class as a demo, and you want to be ready to help your team in any way possible. You don't want to just, forego your role just to try and spot some random trap. But, you know, a team might be able to spot that. And that applies to like Snakewater Lower again, like just trapping the door and without having to watch the door. You know, just tell your soldier to call your det. Now, teammates spotting traps is inherently less reliable than you spotting them because, of course, there's, you know, delay and pretty much like there's just comms latency, not only to, you know, your teammate calling and you reacting and detting, but also just like ping and stuff like that. It just makes it all less reliable. And plus, like if they don't play much demo either, they might not be able to call that det as reliably, although that's a much less minor factor. So again, it's not you spotting the trap. It is not, you know, as reliable as your reaction time is, but it's still something. And actually, I guess that was kind of a blind det I just got there. Scout on shed. Just kind of, I probably could have killed him sooner while I saw him, but still, just context stuff. Sometimes it is as simple as just kind of feeling out a timing for when it's right. Although that, I guess, just comes with experience. But yeah, comms are another example of getting that extra context, helping you make your trap that you can't spot not just a blind det, right? Make it a little more likely to succeed than that. What are some other examples? I mean, the big one is going to be objective notifiers. Because unlike vision or comms or all these other examples that are in and of themselves unreliable, because of course, you know, once a player's out of your vision, they could be doing anything. A random player stutter stepping might interrupt your timing and then it's all for naught. And likewise, you know, a teammate might miscall the det or any number of things. So they're all inherently unreliable, but the cap time on your HUD does not lie. You know beyond a doubt that a player is positioned in that location. And depending on the multiplier on the point, you have a decent idea of how many players are on a point. And this is useful for a multitude of reasons, between knowing or, you know, having approximate information on when an enemy team might be trying to push the next point with add versus just trying to stack the cap, which is useful information for you to have in general on demo for knowing, you know, how much time you have to set up traps, for instance. But even outside of that, that cap time is such a useful notifier for detting traps. And the classic example is on last, right? Disadd last, you really always want to have the point trapped as demo. And knowing when to det that point while you're kiting, and oftentimes you're kiting through spawn, and most spawns don't have windows you can like spot the point through. At least not the entirety of point. The only example I can think of really is like Gully Wash. So a lot of the time you are relying on that cap time to inform you on when to det. And there is some, there's some decisions to be made about when to det. Like, you know, sometimes a scout will just stutter step the point really quickly to try and bait out that det before committing to the cap. Sometimes they've actually cleared a stick on the corner or something with which they can cap. And on other occasions, they might just commit to the cap without realizing they're actually in range of sticks and in danger. So whether you cap immediately or, you know, give it a second or something is up to you, and you can mix it up or do whatever. There's an entire... there's actually a surprising amount of depth to that, contrary to what you might believe. Well, that almost makes it sound like there's like a vendetta behind that. No, it's just an interesting amount of depth to just such a simple decision. But anyway, you are, of course, using that cap time as your only means of context for when the point is being capped, right? And this applies to more points than just last. There are so many traps that might be just on a point itself. For instance, you know, process mid is a point that often gets trapped up. You can be trapping up process second on kind of that metal sheet fence. Sunshine second, the very common point to be trapped. I just recorded a Reckoner review in which I talk about a trap on mid I'm a huge fan of. And again, these are all traps that are on the point, and it's just as simple as detting when they get on the point or detting just, you know, soon after they get on the point, to where you know, you think they've moved into the position where your trap is. So many points on so many maps function like this, just using that cap time as a means to inform you about when to dead. And again, they don't have to be on the point themselves necessarily. Again, on process, you can be trapping on the sides of the spire, and likewise on Snakewater, you could be trapping the drop down from point to lower lobby. Because, you know, on Snake, a lot of teams will cap 2 and then go lower lobby to either pressure or continue pushing. And you can use that cap time, or rather when the cap is finished, or when the cap goes from, you know, ×5 to ×2, indicating that the rest of the team moved on and they left their flank scout to cap. You can use all these context clues in order to, in order to inform when to dead. So all this is quite important for helping you, you know, blind det as effectively as possible. And there was something, oh man, I lost my train of thought in the first recording as well. We were talking about context clues with the cap time on point and helping you det more effectively. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it'll come back to me, but we're going to move on. So why even set blind det traps rather than just trapping the doorway that you can see and trying to kill the first person through? Well, for a few reasons. So for starters, you don't always have the benefit of being able to set every trap that you'd like. And in fact, if demos had unlimited time to set up traps in a game, you could almost guarantee a pick or a drop, right? Because you could just trap either doorway that the other team could get through and set up really good, difficult to spot traps in them as a result. Oh, I do remember what the last thing I was going to talk about was. So yeah, we'll talk about that first and then talk about why you set blind det traps. So put a pin in that thought for a moment. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is actually creating context for yourself with other stickies. Because there are plenty of examples of traps that are, in theory, could be quite good, but have one crippling weakness, which is they aren't in a position that you can reliably spot them. So a couple examples I can think of. One being any trap that's just deep in saw, for example. You can trap the saw blade itself, you can trap the pillar, you can trap all sorts of things. And this applies to many, many different places in the game. It's very easy to set very deep traps in a doorway that doesn't get cleared for traps because it's a doorway that can't get spotted. But since it's unreliable to actually spot these traps, they don't see use. They're just not that good. However, if you can create context with other sticks, then suddenly it's a lot more usable. And what I mean by this is just placing other sticks that are much more visible in a place that doesn't raise suspicion necessarily, that end up getting cleared, giving you information, you know, when your sticky count goes down, that a player is in that area. So I've seen success with this in Snakewater Saw, Sunshine as well. Sunshine Cafe has doorways in them that aren't flush with the wall. Very easy to hide sticks in those, but very difficult to spot players trying to push, you know, that deep into Cafe if you're playing on mid. So you can use those kind of bait stickies as context getters, essentially, in order to help inform you on that det. Now, of course, these are still inherently unreliable, but it's still something, and it's going to be way more successful if you give yourself extra context than it would be if you just set a trap that you can't spot and then just hope that you get the det correctly, right? That's basically the entire point of this video, is to try and avoid doing that, because that's just not a good use of your ammo and your time when you could be trapping any number of things. So yeah, now returning to that prior thought. You give a demo unlimited time to set up traps, they will get a pick pretty much every time, right? Because you can trap any door that you want, you can put up any trap in that door that you want. But that's just not how the game works, and oftentimes you don't have time to set up traps wherever you want. So as a result, you aren't able to trap every doorway and just get, you know, just trust your reaction time to get that pick as they're getting through. And in some cases, you might have to set traps more passively, right? And in some cases, you might have to set a trap that's like very passive in that you are now, excuse me, my train of thought is going, that are so passive that you have to basically be out by the time that anyone would approach them, right? And this isn't necessarily just a matter of passivity, because of course there are some examples I've given of traps that are actually much deeper than players expect them, such as like deep in Saw or deep in Cafe. But the point still stands that despite the fact that those are, you know, those traps are quite deep, you are still playing much more passively to the point where you can no longer spot them. So in all these examples, like, you are not given the luxury of necessarily setting traps that you can spot. So it's a matter of making the most out of those traps, right? That being said, there are some unique merits to these kind of blind det traps, that traps on doorways and just the very standard stuff that is good, and there's a reason why they're so consistently used. But a lot of the time, traps on just a door, like lower lobby on Snakewater, is a door that everyone is going to clear for traps. If you're not clearing it for traps, then you are misplaying, because it is so reliably trapped, and so what's the word I'm looking for? It punishes you so hard for not checking it as well, because, you know, it's so easy to drop there. Just clearing traps on doors as a combo before getting through the door is a vital part of pushing a point, and it's something that should happen every single time. But that being said, clearing a trap on the logs on Snake 2, or what's another example I can think of? Clearing a trap on like the pack on Process, or just clearing all these weird traps that aren't as common as just a trap on the door, are not in the flowchart, right? Plus, if it's like a particularly passive trap, such that by the time someone's near it, you are already out of the point, teams will absolutely let their guard down, right? Because people get in the habit of being in like trap clearing mode and on alert when you're pushing into that point, because of course those are all the pressing threats at the moment. But once you have that ground, once there's no more fighting happening, people tend to let their guard down and just think about the next thing they're going to do. And you can abuse that in that blind det traps are going to be way less likely to get cleared. And when they get cleared, it's going to be more so incidentally than with purpose, right? Like, oftentimes a player's just going to happen to look at it. And that is actually a kind of downside of it. If you're leaving a trap cooking for a long time, not only can you miss multiple opportunities to get kills on players that are on the trap just by virtue of the fact that you don't see it, but also players might just happen to spot it suddenly just by kind of looking around and doing whatever. But yeah, it's still something, like, people have their guard down, and if you are using context to your advantage, then you might be able to take advantage of that and, you know, get a pick that you otherwise wouldn't have. So anyway, long story short, the best way to get kills with blind det traps is to actually make them not blind dets, and to use all the context you have to your advantage in order to inform when you want to det in order to maximize your chances of getting a pick, right? That sounds so straightforward when put like that, but there's a lot of different applications and different ways that you can go about that, and I just thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about, because blind dets are kind of like a bit of a meme in the sense that some demos actually get accused of like cheating and such if they get too many blind dets. And some demos actually I have suspected of cheating because they would play for blind dets and get them without any extra context, which is really weird and like not something that you would expect at a high level, especially. But yeah, that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys were entertained, and I will see you next time.